After Algeria's Bouteflika, it's out with Sudan's Omar al-Bashir. Celebrations in Khartoum greeting news that the country's strongman of 3 decades had been placed under house arrest. What started back in December as cost of living protests coming to a head, with the army stepping in to protect those staging a sit-in outside army headquarters where Omar al-Bashir is reportedly now being kept. It's definitely a coup, but what kind? The defense minister who announced Bashir's ouster was deputy chief of staff for Bashir, who's under U.S. sanctions for his role in atrocities committed in Darfur. What's left of Bashir's 29-year rule? The military man's apparatus, his militias, his feared National Intelligence and Security Service. Who to succeed him? And what of the democratic aspirations of protesters from very different walks of life, who in some cases gave their lives? What prospects going forward for this giant of Africa and the Arab world? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Sudan and the fall of Omar al-Bashir. With us in the studio, we have 2 activists. Aza Ali is a pharmacist by training, yes. And a business school graduate, Shaugi Ahmed. Thank you for being with us. We have from Khartoum, Khalid Ali, who has been taking part in the demonstrations. Thank you for joining us. Mm-hmm. And here in the studio as well with us, Sudanese journalist Khaled Siraj Adin. You've been in France for
4 months, yes.
4 months.
Oui.
Okay, we'll talk more about your story shortly. And from Djibouti, Zach Verton, fellow at the Brookings Institutions and former senior advisor to the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan. Your new book, A Rope from the Sky, the making and unmaking of the world's newest state, talking about South Sudan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, they started as protests against rising fuel and food prices. Now, the same Omar al-Bashir who came to power in a coup in 1989 is out. Anka Ula has more.
Before they even knew what the military was announcing, protesters were already celebrating in the streets of Khartoum. Sudan's defense minister delivered what they had been demanding for months: the removal of President Omar al-Bashir.
As defense minister, I declare the fall of the regime and the placing of its leader in a safe place following his arrest.
As for the army's next steps, he said a transitional military council will lead the country for 2 years until elections are held. He announced a 3-month state of emergency, a nationwide ceasefire. He suspended the constitution and imposed a night curfew. And he closed the country's airspace for 24 hours and closed the borders until further notice. The security agency also announced the release of all political prisoners. Protesters have been demanding Bashir's ouster for months, and demonstrations first sparked in December by the rising cost of bread. Since Saturday, thousands have gathered outside the Defense Ministry compound in the capital, where the president lives and where the army headquarters are located. As days went by, the army drew closer to the people, protecting them from Bashir's security forces. But now, despite their joy, protesters are wary. Organizers called for a civilian transitional government and say they're in talks with the military about a transfer of power.
The government is still putting pressure on us. It continues to want to seek control and power over us. The defense minister and Bashir are 2 sides of the same coin. As citizens, we see what's happening. The government is manipulating us.
Several organizers of the protests have rejected the defense minister's announcement, calling on Sudanese to continue their protests.
Let's begin with Khalid Ali in Khartoum. Among the measures that have been announced, there's a 3-month state of emergency, and for 1 month, a nighttime curfew from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Tell us your thoughts on that curfew, first of all, and on what your views are on what's going to happen now.
Yes, the state of emergency and the curfew have been announced a couple of weeks ago. And there must be around 500,000 or more Sudanese men and women in a sit-in around the army headquarters as we speak right now. I don't think anybody is going anywhere. People are resilient. The sense is that we will stay the course until all the demands of the people are met, as stated in the Declaration of Freedom and Change. There's a little bit, the environment is a bit tense because of the heavy presence of the military, and nobody knows if violence will erupt by the army operatives or not. The sit-in has been completely peaceful. The entire movement on the streets, demonstrations, the sit-in have been completely peaceful for 3 months, going on 4 right now. If any violence erupts, it will be from military people. But nobody is going home. Essentially, the revolution continues, and people are just going to sustain until the demands of the people are met.
Yeah, what was your reaction? Because we heard in that report, the defense minister, who's also the vice president there, announced the, quote, the fall of the regime. Your thoughts on that?
The regime has not fallen. However, in office, the vice president is the secretary of defense. He is he's on the U.S. List of persons of interest for his documented role in masterminding the military campaign in Darfur, killing hundreds of thousands of Sudanese civilians, right? This is a continuation of the Inqaz regime. Nothing has changed. His declaration and announcement does not address a single item in the Declaration of Freedom, which is the voice of the people of Sudan right now. Everything is in place. The regime is in place. This is just a rebranding of Inqaz into an uglier form.
All right, a rebranding. Let me ask some of our panelists here. Aza Ali, first of all. So the day begins this Thursday with news of lots of troop movement and a big announcement to come. What were your thoughts?
For my opinion, this is really beginning of the process of the victory for Sudanese people. The victory, it is process for us. Now, the authorities of the regime, it carried out by the army. We not accept the statement of the army because we have declaration of the freedom and change. We need all the point in our declaration to accept and to apply in the life. First of all, the first point, of course, set down the Omar al-Bashir. It's okay for us, but there is formation for national transition government. Continue for 4 years. Sudanese people now happy and confident more about the sit-in, and they will continue the sit-in until the all declaration free and change achieved, not less.
All right. So for you, it's a step, but it's not the end of the process.
Exactly.
Let me ask you on this point, Khaled Sirajuddin, the announcements, the closing of the airspace, the state of emergency. There is this fear, and you heard it expressed there by Khalid Ali in Khartoum, that there could be violence.
Okay, first of all, I'm glad to be here and to reflect this image of young, because what's happening there is like young revolution. First of all, I'm just want to like the title that Khalid Ali said, that the regime right now is rebranding itself, and I'm totally agree with Azza and what she said. But I'm not considering it as like a victory. But I think it's like just one step to the victory. And what I'm saying here, actually, tonight, maybe we can expect that there's like it will be violence at 10 o'clock, because the defense minister Awad ibn Auf, he declared that, and there will not be like protesters in the street after 10 o'clock from tonight. Emergency law or military law. He announced that it's like from today he will be in every street in Sudan. So
the tipping point, Shaugi Ali, comes earlier this week. The sit-in is happening. It gets violent. There are people killed, and soldiers from the soldiers step in on the side of the people against the security forces. and say no. I think at least 6 of them were killed in that bloodshed. So at 10 p.m., what happens then?
Well, will be like I think it will be like a major indicator for the entire process since the last night. However, I believe that that the people from the army will hope that they will respond to the demand of the people, because obviously the people are like, there is an inner conflict, of course, definitely between them, but it's obvious that the major part of the army, like when I say the low ranks again, and the medial ranks are like starting with the people, and I'm reflecting many of and Mr. Khalid also can confirm what I'm saying, that they are with the people, they're standing with the people in the gays, the people who are in the streets right now, they telling them that we are with you. However, when it comes to the high ranks, these people are not convinced yet, and again, we're talking about a 29 years regime, so it's not an easy task to do. However, yes, the real time will be like on the 10 p.m. today.
How big, Zach Verton, is that split between the upper ranks and the lower ranks within the security apparatus, within the military?
Thanks very much. And let me just say first to our fellow panelists, Mabruk, and congratulations on a really extraordinary and awe-inspiring achievement. In terms of the security establishment, it's obviously very opaque, hard to see from the outside. I think in addition to your question about upper and lower ranks, I think it's important to understand the potential splits between the security services. So over the last few years, there's been increasing rivalry between the army and the National Intelligence and Security Service, but also paramilitary units. Some would argue that this was a strategy by President Bashir to make these forces compete and to prevent any one of them from becoming too strong. So I think that's an important thing to watch over the next hours and days. But also, as our colleagues have hinted, this is a 30-year regime. This announcement of President Bashir's ouster came just a few hours ago. Things are fast and fluid, and a lot more is going to unfold over the coming days and weeks.
You talked about the cracks that have appeared, and Omar al-Bashir was an incredible political survivor for so long. We remember the 1998 U.S. airstrikes on Khartoum, and yet we had come to the point in late 2017 where the U.S. had lifted sanctions on Bashir. How do you explain that now he's gone?
That's the million-dollar question. Very difficult to explain. I think he learned to adapt over time, right? And I think this regime long ago surrendered any political agenda. It surrendered any ideology. It surrendered any political platform to serve the people of Sudan. And it adopted instead a single platform issue, which was survival. That was obviously reinforced by the International Criminal Court's indictment of President Bashir, as in many ways his clinging to office thus far was a means to avoid arraignment at The Hague. So I think a number of factors, including the economic situation, including splits within the political establishment, as well as these splits we've talked about within the security establishment, helped create this. But also, what shouldn't be underestimated or understated is the role played by our colleagues here and the many tens of thousands on the streets of Khartoum. That is really, it was their efforts and their sustaining these protests, which is what is different than years past, was these protests being sustained over a period of months, which really helped close the book on this final chapter of Bashir.
In 3 decades, Omar al-Bashir knew several incarnations, coming to power as an Islamist with ideologue Hassan al-Turabi, the Secretary General of the National Islamic Front, described by some at the time as the power behind the throne, before falling out of favor in the late 90s. These ideological questions, let me put it to you, Shawge Ahmed. Right now, what do those in power in Sudan stand for? Are they Islamists? Are they not? Are they nationalists? What's their ideology?
So they believe, as the they put themselves under the umbrella of the Islamists, but they don't have any relation to it. Basically, they have this, let me say, naive loyalty to the regime themselves, or Omar al-Bashir, and there is also under the hierarchy itself, there is other commanders or leaders within the group, which is like Ali Osman or Nafi'. So I would say it's more like a picture of militias, and those militias have their own leaders who have their own interest with the sustainability of the regime, and that's it.
Yeah, Khalid Ali, we've seen the images of people that from so many different walks of life that have been taking part in the protests. Will it be difficult to keep everybody united if they're from different places, different ethnic groups, if they have different views of what democracy would look like?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, this announcement by Awad ibn Auf, in my opinion, will unite the movement on the ground more, and it will cement the links between the people. We have been protesting for 4 months now, despite almost an entire blackout. There's not a single foreign correspondent on the ground in Khartoum. The last one was Yusuf al-Bachir for Channel 4, who had to leave the country maybe a month ago. And then this is day 6 of a sit-in in front of the army headquarters in Khartoum. These people are not just sitting there waiting. People are talking. It's like a people's parliament, and people are discussing issues, real issues, very deep conversations. On the images that you see, you might see a festive mode or some celebratory face to the revolution. But people from different walks of life, different education levels, different economic backgrounds, and even social backgrounds, are discussing the actual real issues that's facing everybody. There's not a single house in a country of 40 million people that hasn't been touched, negatively impacted by this regime. It's either somebody has lost their job, or somebody who was killed in war, or somebody who had to flee the country looking for a better life. So, I mean, everybody, the entire nation is against the military junta that's supported by the Islamists. And I beg to differ with your guest who said that there is no ideology behind the current regime. It is a kleptocracy, but the main beneficiary group of this is still the Islamists. I mean, they control all the finances and all the money, and they have put their hands on the economy. They control the state apparatus of security and violence, and they are absolutely the only group of people within this big population that's benefiting from a rebranding of the same, or producing more of the same regime, because basically their existence is now threatened.
All right.
They don't want to stand in front of trials.
We're going to, Khalid Ali, we have to take a very quick break, but we're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking on the day that Sudan's ruler of 3 decades has been ousted from power, Omar al-Bashir. With us here in the studio, 2 activists, Aza Ali and Shawgi Ahmed. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to journalist Khaled Siraj Adin. And we're joined by activist Khalid Ali, who is with us in Khartoum, and from Djibouti by Zach Verton, fellow at the Brookings Institution and the author of A Rope from the Sky, The Making and Unmaking of the World's Newest State, South Sudan. There had been other movements in Sudan in 2013, in 2016, before the protests that began December 19th in the city of Atbara. Julia Kim has more.
Protesters first took to the streets on December 19th, angry at the government's decision to triple the price of bread. They spread to Khartoum and other cities a day later, with demonstrators calling for freedom and the fall of the regime. Clashes broke out as police tried to disperse the crowd, and several were killed. On December 24th, after 6 days of demonstrations, President Omar al-Bashir broke his silence and vowed to introduce reforms. But protests continued into January. Al-Bashir announced he was ready to step down, but only through elections.
I confirm that whoever wants to take over power is welcome, but only through one way, which is the ballot boxes, free and fair elections. Whoever rules Sudan has to be chosen by the Sudanese people.
But protests continued. Human Rights Watch released videos documenting violence by security forces, including live fire and beatings, accusing authorities of a brutal crackdown. On February 22nd, al-Bashir declared a nationwide year-long state of emergency and dissolved the federal and provincial governments. 3 weeks later, a new cabinet of his loyal supporters was sworn in. Protests, though, intensified at the beginning of April. On Saturday, thousands marched in Khartoum, calling for the army to join them and back their demands. Things turned violent on Tuesday as security agents tried to disband the mass sit-in outside the army headquarters. But after 4 months of mass demonstrations, protesters finally got what they wanted.
As Defense Minister, I declare the fall of the regime and the placing of its leader in a safe place following his arrest.
After 3 decades of rule under Omar al-Bashir, Sudan's fate will once again be decided by the army. The defense minister announced the creation of a military council that would govern the country for the next 2 years.
Now, Khaled Sirajuddin, you were telling us that you're new to France, right? Been here for what, 4 months, you said?
Yeah, I arrived France before 4 months.
Okay. And you've seen that a lot of the media attention the last couple of months has been on Algeria.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's playing out in a similar way, right? You have the president, longtime president, who is out, but the military is still there and the old guard has not gone away yet. Would you say the situation right now in Sudan is more comparable to what you're seeing in Algeria or to what we've witnessed over the past year and a half in Ethiopia, a country that's neighboring to Sudan?
Okay. First of all, if we want to make this comparison between Algeria and Sudan, we need to search deep in the Sudanese situation. I think this is like different scenario. What happened in Algeria is different from what happening right now in Sudan. What happening in Sudan is just changing the face. Like Khalid said that the regime in Khartoum is rebranding itself. Awad ibn Auf, he's the like...
Because that's the suspicion of people on the street in Algiers.
Yeah. But Sudanese people, they know this regime. No one knows more better than us in our situation and our own situation.
But why is it a coincidence, the fact that this has happened in Algeria and in Sudan at the same time?
Yeah, I think so, kind of. It's like destiny. It's like coming in the same time, period of time. Or maybe like Sudanese people, they inspired the Algerian nation to go to the street and demonstrate.
Chemistry.
Yeah, it's
because we are suffering
we saw images
same things.
Yeah.
Yes, we are suffering same things. We need them changing for our life.
So, Zach Verton, do you agree that it's a coincidence, the fact that we've seen these protests, they've described in similar fashion, where the protesters are young and peaceful in both Algeria and Sudan at the same time?
Yeah, I wouldn't draw too many parallels. I think it's notable that while lots of attention has come to Sudan over the last couple of days, as your colleagues can attest, these protests began months ago and really have sustained an impressive fashion. So while certainly I think the two events may have reinforced one another, or people may have been inspired to continue by one another, I see them as distinct.
All right, but
scenarios.
One of the questions we've been asking for both countries is, in 2011, when there was the Arab Spring and there was change or attempted change in so many countries, Algeria and Sudan were two of the countries that were kind of on the sidelines of all of that. So again, it's the same question I put to you in part one of our discussion, which is, why is it coming to a head now?
Well, I think there were popular protests around the time of the Arab Spring, including in Sudan. I think the one important thing to understand is that while the regime in many ways ran the Sudanese economy into the ground, the one thing it did invest in heavily over these years is the security establishment. And in many ways, that was an insurance policy against its own misrule. And so while there were attempts in the past to protest and to demonstrate against this government, more often those were confined to Khartoum and sometimes to narrower constituencies than we've seen in recent days. I think really importantly and really impressively, so many opposition voices came together this time around, and it included the professional classes in Sudan, right? So many Sudanese had been driven abroad or discouraged or co-opted by this regime over the last decades, and those people really came out in force this time and helped add kind of a missing ingredient.
Yeah, a better organized opposition, Khalid Ali. Why is that this time around?
Would you repeat the question again, please?
It seems as though civic groups and the opposition were better organized this time around. Why is that?
Yes, let me just comment on the conversation or the debate that you were just having. I find it very difficult that you could think of Sudan within the context of an Arab Spring or Algeria or any of the context in Sudan is very different and very particular. The people of Sudan have a very long legacy of changing regimes, changing military dictatorships. There are two major revolutions that toppled military dictatorships long before there was an Arab Spring. There was a revolution in 1964 when General Aboud was toppled by the people of Sudan, and then in April 1985 when the people, in a peaceful manner, also removed General Nimeri. So, I mean, the particulars are very different. Now, why is the opposition is more organized right now? The resistance against this regime hasn't started in December 19th. This is an accumulation of resistance that started in 1989 as soon as General Bashir came on a military coup backed by the Islamists, by the National Islamic Front and Hassan al-Turabi at the time. There has been a very long history and legacy of resistance. Some groups picked up arms in different parts of the country because they were directly attacked by the regime and they had to defend themselves. Others chose civil and peaceful methods to resist the regime. But right now, the particularities of the December movement and going forward draws lots of conclusions and lessons from the September 2013 when people also took to the streets and the same regime with the same al-Bachir and the same military junta opened fire and killed 300 peaceful demonstrators in 2 days, right? And before that, there were demonstrators in 2011, 2010, 2009. The Doctors' Union of Sudan have been in strikes since 2009, on and off. Different, civil society players, unions, labor unions, political parties. I mean, there are different ways that the people of Sudan have been resisting the military dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir.
It didn't start on December 19th, is what you're saying. Now, one 22-year-old activist in Khartoum has now captured the world's attention. That's Ala Salah, an architecture student. What's she chanting there, Aza Ali? What's she saying?
It's very difficult to translate it.
Yes, but of course, from the beginning, the woman are creating all the woman leading this reaction from the beginning, because we are the much suffered within government, Bashir government.
And you heard Khalid Ali saying that there's a long history of opposition in Sudan, but what is new, of course, is social media and the fact that
social media rule. It's the main rule for social media. They organize the people. And maybe we also learn many experience from the other. Social media really play main role on this from the beginning.
I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with this question, so I'm going to put it to you as well, Shawgi Ahmed. Why we talk about social media, the fatigue with the regime, why it's now coming apart, why you do see these cracks within the military, why is it coming to a head now? It's what are your thoughts?
I would say it's like consolidating. You know, like it's much of the feels, the fears, the pain that the people have been carrying through the last 30 years. And it happened right now. Again, I mean, if you ask me from the beginning, if I linked it also to the things happening in Algeria, it's all about the social media. Because right now we can see that the people, the protest right now, the manifestation in all different cities, it's all empowering each other, you know. So the people in Atbara, seeing the people in Port Sudan are going out, seeing the people in Khartoum are standing for their rights and so on. So there is this sense of solidarity that happened, you know. And also in Algeria, it's the same context happening there. And there is this comfort. We're sharing pictures that you can see even in the social media posts that people in Algeria are caring about people in Sudan and sharing support, and also the vice versa from the Sudan.
And there is no media, television reflect our protest from the beginning. Very good. Only by social media we reflect all the what's happening in the
And
Sudan.
is it difficult to sort the wheat from the chaff? What is really happening and stuff that's not true? Khaled Sirajadin, if the movement is entirely dependent on social media, it's got its good points and its bad ones, I presume.
Actually, I have different opinion that in this topic, particularly because I think social media there is like a different like role. There's like happening in the Sudanese revolution that the citizen in Khartoum they saw the violence right in their doors, like in the street, and they saw that the police officer and intelligence officer killing people and their own children in the street. But social media have always this different opinion that social media is affect badly in the revolution. And one of the greatest articles that wrote about in this topic, why revolution will not be tweeted, which is like an article for like written by Malcolm Gladwell, New Yorker. So I think social media is like gives this language, common language between Algerian protester and Sudanese protester. But I think what helped in Sudanese situation that the violence that Sudanese back days the Sudanese citizen they just hear it in Darfur in Nuba Mountains. Right now they saw it right in the street.
There's proof of it.
Yeah,
proving.
Zach Verton, let's talk about the prospects for Sudan. We don't know what's gonna happen in this standoff between the street and the security apparatus. Omar al-Bashir came to power in the midst of a long civil war in South Sudan. On his watch, there was the crackdown as well in Darfur, where he is, of course, wanted still at the International Criminal Court over the 300,000 killed in that conflict. When you look at the Sudan of today, what are its prospects? And we're looking at the map while we speak to you, showing Darfur and showing South Sudan.
Well, I think the only way to go is up and forward. Sudan has been really a pariah state to the international community for most of President Bashir's rule. It's been under really punitive sanctions measures, and that's deterred both commercial investment and other kinds of social engagement with the wider world. And today was step one. The announcement of Bashir's departure, as I mentioned, is just a few hours old. And it's going to be a long road from here. But really, it's a moment, hopefully, for optimism. I think a couple of things could happen in the immediate term that would kind of nudge Sudan in the right direction and give it the best chance for a transition. One is that this military council find a way in the near future to involve a civilian component. It's not exactly clear what that looks like, but that would go a long way towards addressing the desires of the protesters, just as some of your guests have mentioned. But also, I think it's really important that the outside world, why it can't determine what happens in Sudan, that's left to the Sudanese people, it can help. And the West and Washington in particular have an opportunity right now. So I think Congress and the U.S. administration could step. I think both Congress and the U.S. administration could step forward right now and offer to back real reformers inside the country. Right. So there's still people sitting on the fence. There's still people that need to be convinced. The beginning of this revolution can go in any direction. And so I think Washington could right now step up and offer both to lift, if it sees real progress, if it sees the demands of the opposition met. I think it could both offer to lift existing punitive measures and offer some other incentives, some political, diplomatic, economic incentives that could help really bolster a transition and see this thing off in the right direction.
As we're speaking, another event happening this Thursday is in Rome, the Pope meeting the leaders of South Sudan after a 2-day retreat at the Vatican before the end of the pre-transitional period of a shaky peace deal between President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar. To what degree, Zach, is the terrible civil war, 400,000 killed we've seen since independence for South Sudan, to what degree is it a cautionary tale for people in Sudan?
Well, I think South Sudan, like Libya, like Iraq, like any of these countries that we've seen really unfortunately experience high degrees of violence and fragmentation, any of those are a cautionary tale. And so it's going to be a challenge for the Sudanese people who have waited a very long time to see today's event and who understandably are demanding real change. They've been sick and tired of this for a long time. And so you can understand the sense of urgency. And yet one can look around the region at history and see that in order to get this right, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be acrimonious. It's going to be slower than most people want. But ultimately, I would guess that a managed transition that draws on the demands of all parties in Sudan is probably preferable, to moving too fast and having things unravel.
Sudanese people now much aware how to lead Sudan for the future and how to develop and improve the Sudan for the big nation. So Sudanese people, they say it clearly, they doesn't need any external fact in Sudan. So this is a pure revolution. Only Sudanese people who did this, and Sudanese people who lead the Sudan for the future.
Right. And just one final question on this point. Shawgi Ahmed, what we've seen in Algeria is every time people step up and try to pit themselves as the leaders of or spokespeople for those in the streets, well, they get told to go away. In Sudan, at some point, the opposition is going to have to organize. Is that going to be doable?
Yes, of course, it can be doable. There is a bit constraint and restriction because of the, as you mentioned, Mr. Zach, the military and the regime itself, like it was investing so much in dividing the people themselves. So the process of the reconciliation that can happen, it can take some time. But I'm sure with the civil participation, with the understanding, with the common values, people can do something. And they are already.
All right, a message of hope. We'll leave it there. I want to thank you so much for being with us, Shawgi Ahmed. I want to thank Aza Ali, Khalid Ali for being with us from Khartoum, Zach Verton in Djibouti, Khaled Siraj Adin. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next.